Hello, let me all welcome you to episode 4, where we are going to discuss how to be interesting. Being interesting is much more important than winning an argument. Being interesting is much more important than showing how clever you are. If you are interesting, people will want to be with you. People will seek your company. People will enjoy talking to you. You may be interesting because you have taken part in an expedition to a remote part of the Amazon to meet up with a tribe that has never seen a white man before. You may be interesting because you have sailed single-handedly around the world. You may be interesting because you are carrying out fascinating DNA research on the population migrations in the history of humanity. But for the sake of this book, we shall assume that you have not done or are doing anything so spectacular. This is a little unfair because whatever you're doing, no matter how humble, is capable of being interesting. The first rule is to talk about what you're good at and what interests you. It may be your job or it may be your hobby. You will need to fashion your discourse to suit two different audiences. The first is made up of those who know nothing about the subject. It is up to you to present the subject in an interesting manner. The second type of audience is made up of those who know something about the matter and want to know more. In the latter case, you should invite questions and seek to answer them. Information. Did you know that female stick insects can have baby girl stick insects without any need for a male at all? If we could work out the hormonal combination that triggered the cells to divide, then feminists could really get rid of men. The seahorse may be the most feminist of all creatures. The female produces the egg, which the male fertilizes. The female then hands the fertilized egg to the male, who has to look after it until the babies hatch. In Queensland, Australia, there is a frog that swallows its eggs, which have been fertilized by the male frog. The frog then turns off the hydrochloric acid and digestive juices in its stomach. The eggs develop in the frog's stomach. When the young frogs are mature, the mother frog opens its mouth and the babies just hop out. Unusual information is one type of interest. You can accumulate such information by remembering paragraphs you have read in newspapers or magazines. You can also take a special interest in some exotic matter and really become an expert. Zulu wars, yacht design, or family structure in Kazakhstan. For the moment, however, let us suppose that you have no special information and are not doing anything very special. How then can you be interesting? What if? What if dogs could be taught to speak? What would happen? It could be hard to keep family secrets because your dog would tell the neighbor's dog and so on around the community. Your dog could answer back. If you told your dog to go outside, the dog might ask, "Why should I?" Your dog could also indicate whether it liked the food it was given when it was hungry. You could set your dog to work, to answer the phone and to carry out errands. Your dog might ask a burglar, "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" Single children and older people on their own would have a friend they could talk to. Dogs might want political rights and even votes. Television and other advertising would take into account the fact that dogs could listen to the advertisements and the dogs could now influence their masters. Dogs might work on newspapers as reporters, using voice recognition software to type out their voices. What if China became the dominant economic power in the world? What if women had to propose marriage? What if human cloning became available and relatively cheap? What if subliminal techniques made TV advertising extremely powerful? What if we all began to speak in code instead of ordinary language? What if everyone listens to this episode? The what if approach involves playing with ideas. Since the ideas are to be played in the future, there is no way of checking which will happen and which will not, because it is so open-ended. An effort should be made to put forward ideas that are logical as possible. For the sake of humor, the occasional fantasy might be allowed. Using this playful approach, the simplest of situations can be turned into an interesting game. For example, what if chief executives were to be trained as chief executives from the youngest age, as soon as they entered the corporation? In France, judges are trained as judges from the earliest age. In the UK, successful barristers are chosen and asked to become judges, although they often decline because the drop in income may be huge. Possibilities and alternatives. Most conversation and argument strives towards certainty. This is the way it is. This is not right. This is what should or should not happen. Putting forward alternatives and other possibilities can make the discussion more interesting. The possibilities can then be explored, even if they are finally rejected. For instance, maybe tax could be handled in a different way. The taxpayer could decide, with up to half the tax being paid, what that money should be used for: health, education, defense. This would allow a sort of voting through taxation. Alternative solutions could be offered for recognizing problems or conflict situations. Once the solution has been offered, then it can be discussed and considered. Around 150,000 people have been killed in a conflict in Algiers. About 56,000 people have been killed in a war in Sri Lanka. Around 39,000 people have been killed in the fighting in Colombia. Could there be any better approaches to solving these sorts of conflicts? Also Kashmir, Northern Ireland, Israel, etc. Could the UN function in a different way? A young Australian doctor suggested that peptic ulcers might be caused by an infection. At first, everyone laughed at him. It turned out that he was right. People who had spent years on antacids could now be cured in a fortnight. Serious operations to remove part or all of the operation, Billroth operations, were now no longer necessary. Science advances through hypotheses and alternative possibilities. It is said that in the USA, 75% of people marry someone with whom they work. This seems a very limited choice. What other alternatives could there be? The internet, newspaper columns, agencies, marriage brokers, Tinder? In Roman Catholic countries, official suicide rates seems very low. Is it because a strong religious element reduces suicide? Or because a suicide cannot be buried in a church graveyard, so suicides are not recorded as such? Quite recently, the lowest birth rate in Europe was in Spain, which is a Roman Catholic country that forbids contraceptive devices. What is happening? Fat people often seem happy. Is this just an illusion? Is it that the same hormones that make them fat also make them happy? Do they eat more because they are happy? Do they seem happy because they see that as the only way they could contribute to society? Once you get into the habit of looking for alternatives and possibilities, any subject becomes more interesting. Speculation. I once knew a very famous philosopher. We were good friends, but we found it difficult to hold a conversation because we each had a different point of view of what a conversation should be. His idea of conversation was that you should start out by defining your terms precisely. Then, at the end of the conversation, you would see whether or not the conclusion matched those initial definitions. My idea of a conversation was more like climbing a chimney in rock climbing. Each step took you further and further into new possibilities and new ideas. These could only be speculative. At the end, you had a garden full of new plants. Far too many people believe that thinking and talking should only be about the truth. It may be correct that we should only trust and act upon the truth. But in order to get there, we may have to explore possibilities, as with the scientific hypotheses. In conversation, there is also the entertainment value. Speculation also has a much higher entertainment value than truth. Playing around with ideas is both interesting and entertaining. Are there fewer women artists than men because women are more serious and have to get on with the serious business of life and families, while men can be more irresponsible, frivolous, and self-indulgent? Connections. Making connections involves possibilities, alternatives, and speculation. Is there a connection between the high suicide rate in China amongst women and the one-child family policy? Is there any connection between teenage pregnancy in England and the welfare policy that allocates public housing to mothers? It is easy to see connections where there are none. Conspiracy theories and paranoia abound in imagined sinister connections. On the other hand, there is no harm in exploring possible connections so long as they are not taken seriously until proven. Creativity and new ideas. If you're marking examination papers and one of the candidates puts forward a new idea, then that candidate moves ahead of all others. All the others may be very competent, but rather dull. A new idea shines out as being different. It is the same in conversation. Most people can be reasonable and competent and rather dull. New ideas are rare because we have been taught analysis and judgment, but never creativity. There is a silly myth that creativity is a sort of a mystical talent which some people have and which others can only envy. It is nothing of that sort. The main purpose of the brain is allowing incoming information to form itself into routine patterns. If the brain did not do this, life would be impossibly complicated and slow. So we identify situations and apply the routine pattern. This is the opposite of creativity. Instead of waiting for creative inspiration, there should be some thinking methods which we could learn and use deliberately. The term lateral thinking is now in most dictionaries, and the methods are widely used in business and elsewhere. The methods include provocation, concept extraction, and random entry. All of them are based on an understanding of the behavior of self-organizing systems. A self-organizing system is one in which information arranges itself into patterns. A provocation is a statement which we know to be false but used to provoke new ideas by moving forward from the statement. In any self-organizing information system, there is a mathematical need for provocation. Take, for instance, a factory on a river which emitted pollution. People downstream suffered from this pollution. The following provocation, the factory is downstream of itself, seems impossible and illogical. But from the provocation comes a perfectly practical idea. If you build a factory on a river, then your input must always be downstream of your input. So you have to be more concerned about cleaning up your own pollution. Creativity is a skill and a habit. You need to learn and practice the skill, which then becomes a habit. Even when without any special creative skill, you can always seek to have new ideas and put them forward. If nothing else, the new idea will provide a starting point for fresh considerations. A most useful habit. You need to get into the habit of saying, "Now that is interesting." Once you are ready to use that phrase, you can now direct the phrase at anything that comes up in the conversation. So instead of just carrying on with the flow of conversation, you can now pause at that point. You explore the point, you elaborate around the point, you open up possibilities and alternatives, you make connections. It's like having a bow and a quiver full of arrows. At any moment, you aim your arrow at a particular point and let it fly. Now that is interesting. You will need to explain why you find the point interesting. You will need to build up and lay out the interesting aspects. You invite the other party to join you in exploring the point. You should learn to use the phrase very formally as an attention-directing tool. It is not just enough to wait for the attitude to arise. You need to direct attention in a deliberate manner. Exercises. Being interested and being interesting go together. You need to develop the habit of finding interest in almost anything. Developing this habit of mind needs practice. A very simple way of doing this is to take different things and then to seek to find interest in them. Imagine you were talking about these subjects. What would you say? How could you be interesting about each of the following? Frogs, democracy, airports, chewing gum, flags, steering wheels, advertising, royalty, scrambled eggs. Try this simple exercise by yourself or with others. Cut out the pieces of cards and write different words on the separate pieces and put them into a bag. Without looking, draw a single card out of the bag. Everyone then tries to find something interesting to say about that item. Now let's summarize how to be interesting. It is always important to get to the truth, but being interesting is more important than winning an argument. You owe it to yourself and to others to be interesting. Interest may rise from interesting things you have done, are doing, or know about. Interest can also arise from how you conduct a conversation. Using the what-if technique can open up new possibilities and new lines of thought. Looking out for possibilities and alternatives enriches the conversation. There is usually more than one way of doing things or looking at things. Speculation looks forward and opens up new areas of interest. Speculation looks forward and opens up new areas of interest. Description only looks backward. Finding and making connection links matters together and generates interest. New ideas are rare and freshen any discussion. Seek to be creative and to generate new ideas. Learn and apply the formal techniques of lateral thinking. Provocation is a useful way to force new ideas. You put forward a statement you know to be wrong or impossible in order to provoke new thinking. Use as a formal tool the phrase, "Now that is interesting." Use as a formal tool the phrase, "Now that is interesting." Be ready to apply this to anything you hear. Seek to explore and elaborate and to pull interest out of any matter. Practice simple exercises to develop your ability to create interest. When someone else opens up an interesting line of thought, go along with it and help to develop the interest further. That concludes this episode of How to Be Interesting. Stay tuned for episode 5, where we will discuss how to respond.